Hello again. I thought I would start with some humor today. Um, we're all just trying to make it through April 30th. I'm hoping that that's as long as we need to go, but I'm afraid we may be going longer, but that's okay. I hope this finds you all happy and healthy and staying in and out of harm's way. Um, I felt like I won the lottery last week because I did score some toilet paper, so I was happy about that. Um, but we're using a lot of Lysol wipes and hand sanitizer at my house, so I hope that you're all doing well. So, what we want to start with, we're going to start with this last group of information, and it's planning curriculum units. We've worked on lesson plans, and by the way, I would like your lesson plans by the end of the month. The last week of April, 4 more weeks, is technically the end of the semester. Your second lesson plan. Now, I realize you don't have, as I've said, you don't have access to materials from the schools and whatever. And I don't want you to go on Teachers Pay Teachers or anything else, Pinterest or whatever, and spend a bunch of money. I want you just to write a solid lesson plan, fill in all the spots, send it in. I'm not worried about what it's about. I just want to give you some feedback on your lesson plan, and so we can take it from there. So as we're thinking about putting lessons together, and I don't know if you're seeing this, I've got this little bar here in my on my side. I hope that's not coming through on yours. One of the things that we have to think about as educators, that there has been a constant debate for years over content versus process knowledge in most areas. Content knowledge and process knowledge are two different things. Content means that you know the content, you know how to do your math, you know how to do all those kinds of things, or you know the social studies or whatever. The process means that you can actually solve the problem or figure out what you're supposed to do with it. And I've seen some really funny things, videos of parents trying to teach math in particular right now, with the way the parents were taught to do math and the way the Common Core standards now require mathematics to be taught. But this is constantly in flux. You are going to find as an educator that education is constantly in flux. It causes authors of standards and benchmarks to disagree about whether to assess content or performance standards. And you will see, if you are elementary or special education, that the all of the content standards, with the exception of science, are content. Science standards are process standards. They are performance standards. Can you do this? Can you do that? It's not, do you have the knowledge? If you have the process standards, the difference is you understand the content, and the content is not necessarily assessed as a content standard. It's assessed through the performance, through the academic processes that you go through to solve the issues. So it was at one time, so you have a bit of a background and a history for where we are with standards right now. There were at one time, there have always been, or for a long, many, many years, national standards, but it was left up to the states to interpret those standards, and every state had their own sets of standards. Um, the Illinois State Board of Education had what were called the Illinois Learning Standards at one time, and those were adopted across the state in 1997 until the advent of the national standards with the Common Core math and English language arts, and then the social science and the science followed suit, and they they tried to nationalize standards with the idea that if you moved from one state to the next, that you would all of our children would be on the same page. Well, the state standards were used as a basis, And reflective action in teaching calls for teachers to use their witness to perceive students' needs in conjunction with the standards that are being shown. Curriculum frameworks at the state level frequently change based on the latest research in education. Now, you have to understand where the research and education comes from multiple areas. And so many times we pick and choose what we feel is appropriate. They're also heavily influenced by political pressure and interest groups within the state. For example, this goes beyond the state. This is at the national level. The Bill Gates Foundation gave the money to develop the Common Core mathematics standards. So those standards are going to be written more to the technology end of things and the engineering end of things than anything else because Bill Gates paid for them. Well, they're influenced by a lot of political pressure. There are all these lobby groups and interest groups within the state and within the country on how things are to be done and how things go. For instance, in Texas, many of the schools, and even with all the advent of all the standards, those standards are still slanted toward number one, the oil industry, and number two, NASA, because they are the biggest employers in the state. And that's where they're looking to employ these children who are children now in school as they come of age. So Texas produces a lot of engineers and chemists as a result. When we look at textbooks, they have had an enormous impact on the curriculum, obviously. Now, textbooks, you have to stop and think when you're looking at textbooks. You will be on curriculum committees as a teacher in your school districts from time to time when they're looking at changing perhaps a textbook series or moving their curriculum to in a different way, shifting one way or the other. Those textbooks are written from someone's point of view. In other words, you can look at multiple publishers and they'll have the standards all met, but from a different way of looking at things. You have to look at that very carefully, and you have to figure out how this works, because if you don't, you're going to be pigeonholing your philosophy into what the textbook says should be taught and the way things should be taught. One of the biggest controversies regarding textbooks is the rewriting of social studies textbooks to include multiple versions of history. Now, there are lots of ways to look at things that happened in history. Much of the time, history is written from the victor's point of view and how things work. For instance, we talk about in World War II, the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, that it was in everything you read, every documentary you see, everything you look at says that Japan didn't this and Japan didn't that, and they would not agree to our terms for different things. From Japan's point of view, we were the aggressors for Pearl Harbor. Well, it depends on who's writing the book. Reflective teachers attempt to clarify their own values and their own curriculum orientations and beliefs as they make decisions about the curriculum that they teach. You are going to have to be very knowledgeable. It's going to have to go beyond a surface level knowledge of things that you're teaching. You're going to have to know where this came from, how this worked, how this came into being, and how this played out. I just watched a documentary on Adolf Hitler, and he was very popular in Germany. Well, the reason he was very popular is when the economy collapsed, he and his Nazi party opened soup kitchens and they started feeding people. Well, because they were feeding people, the people thought he was a tremendous hero. Hitler ended World War One. He was a soldier in World War One. He ended World War One in what they called at that time an insane asylum, because he kind of went bananas at the end of the war. They used to call that shell shock, and he never really recovered from that. But because he was trying to feed people in his own way, he became the person that we know today. More reflective teachers consider decisions about curriculum planning to be within their jurisdiction or their domain of decision making. But I would add a caveat here, to a point. You can't go away from the district's mandates or what the district says has to be taught. But the way you teach it is up to you. They consult with others, but they take the responsibility for deciding which parts of the textbook to use to meet the needs of their own particular class, to match the goals and learning outcomes of their state and local curriculum committees. Reflective teachers are seldom satisfied to use the textbook alone. Case in point, I do not go by the textbook, as you can plainly see. I do not take the textbook that I use as a basis for this class in the order in which it's written, because many parts of it don't, they have nothing to do with what we're doing or the way we're doing it. And I pick and choose how we do it. Now, I'm giving you, just for instance, through these PowerPoints and through my talking, I'm giving you my slant. Someone else may do something a little different. I'm pulling out of the book what I think is important for you to know based on my experience and what I know about working with the state on curriculum committees at the state level, which I have done, and working with schools developing their curriculum around the standards. You have to make your own choices and you have to make your own decisions about those based on what your school district has in mind and how they see the curriculum and those pieces fitting into their curriculum to meet the standards that they choose, that they're telling you you need to do. One of the things that we can do here, and this works pretty well, and this is one of the things that I've talked to you about with lesson planning, it's called backward mapping. You don't go through the lesson plan top to bottom. I've told you that. You don't have to do that. You can pick and choose. You look at the lesson, you find a standard. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, let's think about this. You know where you want those children to be at the end of a lesson, at the end of a unit, at the end of the academic year. You know where you want them. You know where you need them to be. Now, how are you going to get them there? I have known since the beginning of the semester, I needed to get you to this point, that we've done the lesson planning, that we've done the differentiating, we talked about questioning, we've talked about higher order thinking, we've talked about learning styles. But I needed to get you to the point where we can start talking about putting lesson plans together. I had to backwards map that because I knew where I wanted you. So you begin with the standards. What do you want the students to accomplish? And then you build the lessons, activities, and assessments based on the standards. But you have to know where you need your students at the end to know how you're going to get them there in a systematic manner, all the while modeling for them and scaffolding their instruction. That's what you're doing for the entire academic year. You're scaffolding their instruction. You're pulling them up little by little, but always leaving that safety net there in case they fall and they need your help. As we're talking about backward mapping, we're going to go into unit planning. We're going to stop this video here because we're going to talk about unit planning, and this is a big piece that we want to put in its entirety. So I'm going to stop here and we're going to continue on in a little bit. So I want you to stay safe. I want you to stay in. Keep washing your hands, keep using your sanitizer, stay healthy, don't hoard the toilet paper, and I will talk to you again very soon.